Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look then at what is on the front pages as they come in. In the next half hour or so, we'll see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and journalist Rachel Johnson and the Financial Times' Whitehall editor Sebastian Payne. Great to see both of you. Lots to talk about as well, so let's check out the front pages. Starting with The Guardian, it reports that the Indian variant of COVID-19 will become the dominant strain in the UK within days, which could pose a threat to the final loosening of restrictions on June the 21st. Reporting that some vaccine sceptics have now been convinced to take the COVID jab, the Metro declares at last they get the point. The Daily Mail's big splash, though, says pretty much the opposite. Now vaccine refuseniks threaten freedom. The Telegraph hears that EU ministers will announce on Wednesday that Britons will be able to travel to the continent without the need for tests or quarantine as long as they have a vaccine passport. The Daily Mirror says the return of hugging and indoor gatherings has brought joy to millions of people. And in other news, the Financial Times understands the Cabinet is deeply divided over the terms of a possible post-Brexit trade deal with Australia. We're still waiting for a couple of newspapers. We will bring them to you as we get them. But let's get the thoughts of Rachel Johnson and Sebastian Payne. And Rachel, we've got this strange situation where we unlock with this fear of a new variant. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you?
I know. I mean, we don't need to talk about rain on the parade because it's been pouring across most of the country. This was supposed to be a happy day of hugs, hospitality and future holidays. And we saw those images of many hundreds of people, Brits, arriving in Portugal, looking happy and sunny and celebrating anniversaries or the end of cancer treatments. But the papers are all taking different lines on this. The Telegraph has always been a very let's crack on, and they run obviously pieces by Mark Harper and other MPs from the COVID recovery group like Steve Baker. But there is this issue now as to whether, as the vaccine works, why don't we just get on with it? What are we waiting for? And The Guardian is, science-led, very cautious, always has been throughout the pandemic. The papers are always following in their path. So The Guardian's very cautious. The Mail is taking a slightly different tack, which is that the unlock could be in jeopardy by these people who are not having the vaccine. And these are the people who are mainly ending up in hospital in places like Bolton. So it's a very messy picture tonight. And I think what we've got to focus on is whether the data will show in the next couple of weeks whether the Indian variant is so dangerous that we do have to pause on the great unlock on June the 21st. And I think we're seeing the government injecting notes of caution throughout the day and yesterday when it comes to that. It's going to be very hard when it comes to June the 21st. If the government, led by the Prime Minister, has to disappoint everybody once again, as he did when they cancelled Christmas a few months ago.
Absolutely. And the Health Secretary, speaking in the Commons today, Sebastian, making the point that this is not just, don't think this is just Bolton and Blackburn with Darwin. This is now in 86 local authority areas that have more than 5 cases. And also using this opportunity, as he did yesterday, to stress that the people in hospital in Bolton are often those who could have had the vaccine. They are eligible and chose not to do so, which is the point made in the Daily Mail and also made in the Metro as well. Why has he chosen this opportunity to make that point so clearly?
Well, I think where we're at with this new variant of coronavirus is that it is going to become the dominant variant within the UK. That's what the scientific evidence suggests, because it is much more transmissible than the previous Kent variant that overtook the original variant of coronavirus that came from Wuhan in China. So the real question now is not, does the Indian variant spread? Because, as you said, it's now been detected in all parts of the country. It is spreading very quickly. But the real question we don't know the answer to is just how much more transmissible is it? tested. If it's 30% more transmissible, that may not actually affect the unlocking schedule that badly. If it's 50% more transmissible, that is a big problem. And at the moment, we just don't have the data. And the next 2 weeks are going to be absolutely crucial for that. And there's been all sorts of analysis by various scientists trying to get to the bottom of it. And the answer is we really just don't know. But what we do know about this new variant is that the vaccines are very effective against it. And I think that's why Matt Hancock was so clear in the House of Commons today. You have to get the jab, because the majority of people who are in hospital in Bolton, one of the hotspots for this new variant, and were all eligible for the virus and hadn't taken it. So I think really that is where the big effort is going to be over the next 2 weeks. And we've seen that I think 6,200 people in Bolton took jabs over the weekend. There's been reports of queues of vaccination centres around the town. The government has set up new vaccination clinics, has extended the hours. So they really are throwing the kitchen sink to see if vaccines can get this thing under control. And if they do, then things will look a little bit brighter in terms of that big unlocking Rachel was talking about on June the 21st. But I do think where we're at with this new variant, and we always knew this could happen, unfortunately, you know, whenever the Prime Minister set out his unlocking schedule, he always said the fourth test was going to be there are no new variants of concern. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we have now. So I think there's a good chance June the 21st could go ahead with more unlocking, but masks and social distancing will be required for a longer period of time because of that extra transmissibility. So at the moment, it's really the state putting all hands on deck, doing the testing, doing the vaccines, and we just have to hold our breath for the next 2 weeks to see is that effective or not, and that will dictate what happens this summer.
Yes, that might seem like quite a good compromise to satisfy all, how you're saying June the 21st might play out. But I do think, Rachel, that the first paragraph of The Guardian might shock people, that the COVID variant first detected in India will become the dominant strain in the UK within days after cases rose by more than 75% since Thursday. And we heard Jonathan Ashworth again in the Commons today likening our border security to a sieve because we didn't put India on the red list early enough. Do you think that is a criticism that the government will be listening to?
Well, I think that's a criticism that has been put to the government continuously since the Indian variant started being the dominant variant. But I think that the actual total number of cases is still not enormous. I think it's in the region of, 2,500 or something like that, compared to what we saw before. I mean, the problem is, as Seb pointed out, it really depends how transmissible it is. He's right to point out they are throwing the kitchen sink at this. And essentially, I think we've come down to this. If we want to get towels on sun loungers, the government has got to get jabs into arms. I think that our holiday season, the Great British Summer abroad, apart from our staycations here, is going to be absolutely dependent on people coming forward. Also, I might add, downloading the NHS app. This is really important. I think this is a backdoor COVID passport. I'm all in favour of it. I've downloaded it. It shows I've had my first jab. It says AstraZeneca. It says which batch. Now, in a week's time, it will show I've had 2. In theory, all going to plan, if the EU is going to open up, greenlist us, that means that people like me and whoever else has had their jab, i.e. most of the country, could, in theory, go on holiday if the conditions are right. If the virus is not raging in the country that you're destined for, and the virus isn't raging here. So, it's not all doom and gloom. So I think everybody should, bank the benefits of today, go and get the jab, and keep our fingers crossed that the vaccine continues to be completely effective, as it is so far proved, with very few exceptions in people in hospital in Bolton. I think there are 5 who've had the vaccine but have ended up in hospital, but their actual prior conditions and underlying conditions are uncertain. So at the moment, the news is still incredibly good. And I think we've got to feel confident that we are on track with this, with the roadmap and with the unlocking. But I think Seb might be right on the masks and the distancing. That is something I think we could put up with for a bit longer.
Yes, that's interesting, though, because you mentioned earlier the Daily Telegraph and this idea of Europe accepting British tourists after vaccination. The paper saying under the EU plan, member states would adopt uniform entry requirements, giving fully vaccinated holidaymakers from low-risk countries such as Britain unrestricted entry, which is fabulous news, unless they turn around and say, actually, you've got the Indian variant, we don't like the look of it, you're not coming. So that's also why.
And also, we're not EU members. We're not EU members either. So that's two good reasons for them to decide maybe to keep us out this summer.
OK. Just one final thought then. Daily Mirror, the sort of montage of hope, which is Rachel's theme, Sebastian. Joy for millions as COVID rules are lifted to allow hugs and indoor meetups. It is only when you see pictures like this you realise how much you've been missing and how much you've not been allowed to do for so long, don't you think?
I do agree with that. I've had one COVID jab, and I've been very blessed today to be able to go out for lunch at an actual restaurant, which is a completely overwhelming experience, having not seen the inside of an eatery for such a long time, or had a meal that's not been cooked in my own kitchen. And then I went to the pub this evening to meet a work contact. And again, both these experiences were quite extraordinary. And it's great to see that people are taking advantage of this. And everyone I've seen out and about in London today has done it in that responsible way that Boris Johnson has talked about. And I think that is the crucial thing. And I think because of this variant, people will exercise caution. They won't be breaking all the rules entirely. But I think there is a question of fatigue here. And I think if that June the 21st date does get pushed back for relaxing all restrictions, you know, the country's been through so much in the past 18 months. We shouldn't forget that. When you see these pictures of people being allowed to hug or shake hands for the first time, it's just a reminder of how weird this whole situation has been. And I think that's something the government's going to have to combat with, that if these restrictions go on, if, God forbid, we end up having more local lockdowns or what have you to deal with this new variant, I think the adherence rate is going to be a big struggle in the future here. Okay. But generally, Rachel, I think today is roughly good news.
Rachel, I know you want to come in. We're already over. I just want to say, Sebastian, well done for coming in after pub and lunch out. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Rachel Johnson and Sebastian Payne. So, Sebastian, to the FT then. A ferocious split. Tell us more.
Yes, this is a great story by my colleagues Peter Foster and George Parker about a ferocious fight within Cabinet about a trade deal with Australia. And this is meant to be the first big post-Brexit trade deal that the government has signed, because all the other trade deals so far have been so-called rollover deals, which is essentially maintaining the relationship that we had when we were members of the EU. So this is meant to be part of a big, bold new era. But what we're seeing now on the story of the FT is the real-world trade-offs involved with doing such deals. And basically, the split you've got is between the farming lobby on the one side, represented by George Eustice, the Environment Secretary, and Michael Gove, the Cabinet Office Minister, versus the economic trading side, which is Liz Truss, the Trade Secretary, on the other. And the real question is, are we going to allow Australian quota-free access to our agricultural markets? If we do that, there's big concerns it could prove ruinous for the UK's farming market. But if we don't do that, then there's probably not going to be a trade deal. So this one's going to come right down to what Boris Johnson thinks on this deal. And we quote in the paper senior government officials who say they have no idea which way the Prime Minister is going to go, but which way he does go is going to be so indicative of what this new trading era looks like. Are we going to do lots of free trade deals with countries and have potential problems with our markets at home? Or are we going to water them down and not really do any trade deals of significance at all? So in terms of government policy, it really is a fascinating one.
Rachel, that leaves you with 30 seconds. I know you wanted to do Harry, but you wanted to also talk about this story too. So you pick.
I would just make just a couple of points. I think that geography is really important. And also, as Seb pointed out, the farmers are concentrated in Wales and Scotland. I can't see a Prime Minister of the Union during this particular state of affairs wanting to do much to destabilise them and undermine their livelihoods. Point two, why does nobody talk about the fact that, I know I bang on about this when I do the press review, but Australia is what, 4,500 miles away? The European trading bloc is 22 miles away. I thought we were supposed to be becoming a carbon neutral net zero economy, and yet we're importing thousands and thousands of miles away. None of it really makes sense. What we need is a tariff-free, non-tariff barriers between us and the EU, as well as what we're planning with Liz Truss does all over the world. I mean, they may get tariff-free trade deal or they may not, but the non-tariff barriers to trade with Australia and New Zealand are absolutely enormous.
The battle rages on, doesn't it? As we said. We'll see you both at 11:30. Thank you both very much indeed. Rachel and Sebastian, thank you. Top stories are next.